A suitcase, left beside a petrol pump on the M1. Just a nod, and it vanished into a black saloon car. The man who left it behind didn't run. He filled his tank, paid in cash, and drove north. By the time the car was stopped near Sheffield, the suitcase was gone. But the money trail wasn't. It didn't lead to a single gang or local crew. It stretched across cities: Glasgow, Birmingham, Manchester, London. And then, further out of Britain, into Dubai, Moscow, and even deeper. The National Crime Agency called it one of the most sophisticated money laundering networks they'd ever seen. But it wasn't run by drug lords in tracksuits or hackers in dark rooms. It was couriers, influencers, and shell companies through crypto wallets. No threats, no bodies, just clean, quiet transfers, washing hundreds of millions in drug cash, all the way to the Russian underworld. This is the story of how UK street money became a weapon for the Russian criminal cartels, and how it was finally exposed. It didn't begin with a shootout or a dawn raid. It began with a calm man behind the wheel of a black saloon, driving just north of London on a quiet weekday morning. No chase, no backup, just a routine stop. Inside his car, officers found £335,000 in cash, tightly wrapped and packed into compartments not designed for storage. Nothing flashy, no traces of drugs or weapons, just money. His name was Fawad Sayedi, no criminal record, no gang affiliations. He didn't argue, didn't offer explanations. And in that silence, something shifted. He wasn't just another low-level runner. He was a thread. And when the NCA pulled on that thread, the fabric began to fall away. Serial numbers on the seized notes told their own story. The cash had travelled from East London flats, from garages in Birmingham, and from unmarked units in Glasgow. Every batch linked back to organised drug sales. But it wasn't being reinvested on the streets. It was disappearing. Investigators uncovered a map. We will talk about it later. Each handoff choreographed with corporate precision. There was no single gang at the centre, no regional crew protecting turf. The whole thing was cleaner and sharper. A laundering system designed for speed, not notoriety. Structured like a supply chain, not a cartel. By the time Sayedi was in custody, millions had already passed through the system undetected. The arrests hadn't stopped the machine, they had only shown how sophisticated it really was. And in the middle of it all, still hidden from view, were two names the UK had never heard of: Smart and TGR. They didn't look like criminals. No masks, no disguises, just black duffel bags and a postcode. Some were students, others were delivery drivers between jobs. But together they carried more than £100 million in clean notes. The NCA started tracking them after Sayedi's arrest. What they found was not a gang, but a grid. Over 55 locations across the UK. Lay-bys, car parks, short-term lets, motorway service stations. Each acted as a node in a wider laundering system. One driver would collect a hold-all in Birmingham and drop it in a hotel room in Cardiff. Another would travel from Manchester to Watford, hand it off, then back the same day. No phone calls, no explanations. Seaman Kuksov was one of them, the son of a Russian oil executive living in the UK. On paper, he was studying, but in reality, he moved £12 million in 10 weeks. Always cash, always fast. Another man, Vladimir Jekcha, delivered close to £9 million before being caught. Neither spoke during questioning. Both claimed they were just couriers, whereas Fawad Sayedi moved £15.6 million before he was stopped. He had no criminal record, no history of violence, just a string of banknotes and silence. The system was built to be forgettable. No courier knew the full route. No drop location was used twice. The bags changed, the cars changed, but the routine stayed the same. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't loud, and that was the point. All of it, every transfer, every drop, was feeding something much bigger than any of them knew. The money didn't stop with the couriers. Their job was only the first half. Once the cash changed hands, it entered a second system, one that didn't operate on streets or corners, but through screens, shell firms, and stablecoins. There were two networks sitting behind the entire structure. Their names were almost unknown outside specialist circles: Smart and TGR, quiet and efficient. Smart was built by Ekaterina Zhdanova, a Russian-born operator based in Dubai. But we will talk about her later. TGR was different, less visible, more embedded. Run by George Rossi, a UK-born financier operating from Federation Tower in Moscow and Dubai free zones. His group used shell companies registered in the UAE to process millions through the banking system. Unlike Smart, TGR focused on cash, especially UK drug cash. When the NCA followed the notes from couriers like Sayedi and Kuksov, they found links to these two groups. Every route ended in one of their vaults, physical or digital. The method was simple, but dangerously effective. It started with cash, tens of millions pulled in from drug sales across the UK, collected by couriers, dropped at safe flats, and quickly moved into hands linked to Smart and TGR. From there, it left the physical world entirely. The first step was conversion. Dirty banknotes were swapped for Tether USDT, a stablecoin pegged to the US dollar. Unlike Bitcoin, it didn't fluctuate wildly. It held its value and traveled fast. No delays, no flags, no bank involvement. Wallets were opened and closed in a matter of hours. Transactions bounced across continents, from Glasgow to Dubai to Moscow, invisible to banks, and even immune to most watchdogs. The crypto trail passed through dozens of shell companies, some real, most registered only on paper. UAE-based firms like TGR DWC LLC and TGR Partners Ltd served as fronts, collecting the tokens and converting them again into fiat, property, or investment portfolios. Every step of the journey was legal on the surface. But together, the path scrubbed all traces of origin. By the time the money landed in a client's account, in Russia, Spain, or the UAE, it had no visible link to UK drugs, ransomware, or organized crime. This wasn't fast cash street laundering. It was a digital laundering factory, silent and scalable globally. Smart's focus was cybercrime. TGR handled the narco funds, but they didn't work in isolation. Zhdanova and Rossi exchanged assets, cross-fed wallets, and backed each other's operations. When cash was tight, one stepped in for the other. When scrutiny rose in one region, the other absorbed the load. It was built like a contingency system, a laundering network with no single point of failure. And for years, it worked exactly as designed. On paper, she didn't belong to this world. No rap sheet, no gang tattoos, no record of violence. Just glossy photos from rooftop bars, business panels in Dubai, and crypto summits across Europe. But behind the image, Ekaterina Zhdanova ran one of the most effective laundering machines the UK had ever faced. She was Russian-born, based in Dubai, and fluent in the language of crypto. Officially, she was a business consultant, advising clients on digital finance. Unofficially, she turned dirty money into clean assets for some of the most dangerous clients in the world. As we discussed earlier about one of her networks, named as Smart, was the main way cybercriminals turned their stolen money into clean cash. Groups like Ryuk, Conti, and TrickBot, known for crippling NHS systems and corporate servers, moved their profits through her hands. The system was seamless. She didn't need to hide. Zhdanova moved freely between countries, traveled to Spain, held client meetings in London, posted from poolside apartments in Dubai. To most, she looked like a proper crypto influencer. But the US Treasury had been watching. In 2023, she was sanctioned under OFAC regulations. But we will talk about it in the later part of the video. Money she moved wasn't just from hacks or fraud. It was also from UK drug gangs, and they had no idea who was cleaning it for them. This wasn't just about Russia. As the NCA mapped the flow of money, one name kept surfacing, not from Moscow, but from Dublin: the Kinahan Cartel. one of Europe's most powerful organized crime groups, known for trafficking cocaine, guns, and laundering millions through a web of offshore accounts. They had been under pressure since 2022 when the US sanctioned Daniel, Christopher, and Christy Kinahan, offering a $5 million reward for information leading to their arrests. But while international agencies hunted them, they were still moving money, quietly and efficiently, often through the very networks now under investigation in Operation Destabilise. We will talk about this operation in the later part of this video. UK-based cash from Kinahan-linked cells, especially in Manchester, Liverpool, and Birmingham, had been funneling through the same laundering channels as Russian-linked funds. Shell companies tied to Smart and TGR were found handling transactions for Kinahan-affiliated fronts too. In several cases, drug proceeds were mixed into the same wallets as ransomware payments and oligarch capital. The Russians had built a system that worked, and the Kinahans, facing increasing exposure in Ireland and Spain, were now using it. Authorities believe the relationship between them even went deeper. Communications between Dubai-based intermediaries suggested shared facilitators, common escrow wallets, and potentially even overlapping property holdings. In a global game of money laundering, these weren't separate empires. They were customers of the same machine, but this wasn't just criminal, it was geopolitical. The same laundering routes used by narcos and gangsters were now serving Russian intelligence, state-backed media, and sanctioned oligarchs. What began as a drug and cybercrime investigation soon turned darker. The financial trails didn't stop at cartel fronts or crypto mixers. They kept going into state-linked banks, propaganda networks, and covert Russian assets in the UK. The same laundering structures were also enabling the Kremlin's financial survival. Documents seized during the operation showed that TGR and Smart were helping funnel funds to Russian state media, including the UK arm of RT, Russia Today. When RT's UK operations faced financial restrictions in 2022, funding quietly resumed through crypto, washed, cleaned and routed via Dubai shell companies controlled by the same Rossi and Jordanova's teams. Other connections were harder to ignore. Shell firms tied to TGR were found investing in property on behalf of sanctioned individuals, including Vladimir Magomedov, the businessman linked to the Russian Ministry of Defense. In several cases, funds moved directly from laundering wallets to holding companies in Cyprus, Serbia, and the British Virgin Islands. Some of those wallets had also processed ransomware payments from Western companies, making the system a dual-use tool, helping Russia recover from cyber attacks it likely sponsored, and using the cleaned funds to prop up sanctioned officials. UK investigators referred to the network as a national security threat, not just because of what it did, but who it helped. Crypto wasn't just covering up criminal profits, it was covering up political ones. And it was happening under the radar of UK regulators using routes that blended street money with state strategy. The laundering machine wasn't working for one empire, it was now working for two. By the time the full picture emerged, it was no longer just a financial crime case. The scale, the players, the international links, it called for something bigger. The UK's National Crime Agency launched Operation Destabilise, a coordinated strike across borders, built on intelligence gathered over 3 years. But they didn't act alone. The operation brought together the FBI, DEA, Gardaí, French financial police, and international sanctions investigators. What began with a suitcase of cash on the M1 had become a 5-nation takedown. Raids began in late 2023 and rolled through 2024. Teams hit addresses across London, Manchester, Glasgow, Birmingham, and the Channel Islands. Simultaneously, French police arrested Ekaterina Zhidanova near Bordeaux. In Ireland, customs officials seized crypto wallets linked to Kinahan facilitators. In Dubai, shell companies linked to TGR were frozen and delisted by financial regulators. In total, 84 people were arrested, and more than £20 million was seized, including physical cash, cryptocurrency assets, and luxury property holdings. Over 100 wallets were either drained or blacklisted. Dozens of companies, from consulting firms to courier services, were permanently shut down. The impact wasn't just criminal, it was structural. The takedown dismantled key parts of the laundering ecosystem. Couriers disappeared and wallets went silent. Clients, from drug gangs to ransomware teams, lost access to reliable channels. The NCA called it the most significant laundering network ever dismantled on UK soil. But even as charges were prepared and court cases began, one truth held steady. This wasn't just a gang, it was a system. And like all systems built to survive, it had more than one head. Arrests were only one part of the plan. The real damage came later, in courtrooms, in financial blacklists, and in the cold, silent freeze of digital assets. In early 2024, following the main raids, the US Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control issued coordinated sanctions against the central players behind SMART and TGR. The list wasn't small, and it reached far beyond UK borders. Ekaterina Zhdanova was designated under cybercrime laundering provisions. Her wallets, personal bank accounts, and shell companies were frozen. Her property in Dubai, a luxury apartment registered to a holding firm, was seized under Emirati anti-money laundering statutes. George Rossi, the operator behind TGR, was also sanctioned. Though his current location remained unknown, his companies weren't so lucky. TGR Partners LLC, TGR DWC LLC, and two other Dubai-registered businesses were blacklisted. They'd handled over £150 million in laundered funds between 2020 and 2023. The sanctions hit further. Elena Cherkinian, a longtime associate of Rossi, and Andres Bradens, a Latvian national linked to TGR's logistics, were also targeted. So was Vladimir Magomedov, the Russian state-linked investor who used these channels to bypass UK property restrictions. For investigators, this was the second strike, one that went deeper than arrests. It cut off future access. It shut down accounts, and it sent a clear message. These were no longer just criminal suspects. They were international financial threats, and the freeze didn't just stop movement, it started exposure. New leads began opening in Cyprus, Gibraltar, and Serbia, each tied to wallet addresses linked to Rossi and Zhdanova. The system hadn't just been stopped, it was being pulled apart, one layer at a time. When the dust settled, the couriers were the first to face trial. Their roles had been simple: carry the cash, say nothing, and take their cut. But the sentences made it clear, silence wouldn't protect them. Fawad Sayedi, the man who first drew attention to the network, was sentenced to 4 years and 4 months for transferring criminal property. His conviction opened the path to wider prosecutions. In the courtroom, prosecutors described him as an essential link in a much larger chain. Seaman Kuksov, who had moved over £12 million between cities, received a 5-year sentence. Calm and composed in court, he gave no defense beyond his job description: collect, drive, and deliver. Vladimir Jekta, another trusted courier, was handed nearly 6 years, with the judge calling the scale of the operation industrial. In Ireland, Artus Logvinovs admitted to laundering €50,000, a small part of the system, but enough to earn him 3 years in prison. The key architects were harder to pin down. Ekaterina Zhdanova was arrested in France in late 2023, following a European arrest warrant issued over financial crime allegations. She is currently in pre-trial detention, facing criminal proceedings brought by French authorities. These hearings focus on her alleged role at the center of the smart laundering network. While the UK remains involved in the broader investigation, no extradition request has yet been formally actioned. George Rossi, the man behind TGR, remains at large. His last known location was Dubai. He faces multiple international warrants and US financial sanctions. His companies are defunct. His crypto wallets have frozen. Yet even as sentencing closed the door on dozens of foot soldiers, the question remained: how many more couriers, wallets, and clients had slipped through unnoticed? And how many more were waiting to step in? What's your take? The scope, the secrecy, the structure that held it all together. Were the sentences enough? Or did the NCA just scratch the surface of something far bigger? Let us know what you think in the comments. If you want more real UK crime stories like this, subscribe, turn on notifications, and follow the trail with us. There's always another case to uncover.